So you all know how I like to give you the truth. I like to give you the truth about family court. The truth that no one else will give you, just me. Everyone else will sugarcoat it. I'll give you the real McCoy. Let me start with a question, a simple question. When people hear the words family court, what do you imagine? Most people picture something quite reasonable, a fair system, professionals sitting around a table trying to work out what's best for the child, judges weighing up evidence carefully, experts guiding families through difficult situations. In other words, something calm, rational, balanced. That's the image. That's the brochure version. The brochure version. You know, the sort of brochure I mean. Smiling children, happy parents, everyone sitting around the table looking like they've just solved world peace with a cup of tea. That's the version the system likes people to believe. Now, let me tell you something slightly inconvenient. The reality is often very different because family court is the one of the few systems in this country that most people will never see unless their life has already gone spectacularly wrong. Yeah. You don't visit it out of curiosity. You don't wake up one Saturday morning and think, yep, you know what? Let me pop down to my local family court today. Let's just go down there and see what's happening, shall we? You arrive there because something in your life has already exploded. A relationship, a family, a sense of stability. Yes. And when people arrive there in that system, they often assume the professionals, will see the truth. They think if they're honest, if they present the facts, if they show what's really happening, the system will recognize it. And that's not what people believe. That's what people believe, at least. Anyway. That's what people believe. And sometimes it does happen, but very often it doesn't. And what I want to talk about tonight are the things people discover after they walk into that system. The things that no one warns you about, the things that the brochures don't mention, the truth about how family court actually works when real families are inside it. Because one of the biggest changes I've seen over the years is something the system still hasn't quite caught up with. Dads, specifically dads who are in the primary carers. Now, I work with a lot of fathers, and I mean a lot of fathers. So many, in fact, that what I'm seeing shouldn't be unusual anymore. It should be normal. But everywhere these men go, they're treated like they've wandered into the wrong building. Schools look at them like they've accidentally shown up for somebody else's appointment. Doctors still ask where mum is. Forms still assume there must be a mother somewhere in the background doing the real parenting. Sometimes the dads say, no, it's just me. And you can almost see the system buffering, like an old computer trying to open a file that wasn't programmed to read. Even professionals sometimes seem slightly confused because the system, despite all of its modern language, still isn't entirely used to the idea that sometimes dad is the one doing everything. Dad is the one getting the kids ready for school. Dad is the one at the GP. Dad is the one doing the emotional labor, the sleepless nights, the endless juggling that comes with raising children. And yet, somehow, despite doing all of that, he still gets treated like a guest in his own child's life, like he's just popped in to help with the bins. The system hasn't quite updated its software. And then we get to something that makes people even more uncomfortable, victims of domestic abuse. Now, when I say that, you can almost hear the mental gears turning, because for a lot of people, that sentence still doesn't quite fit the picture in their heads. But it's real. I currently work with two men who are recognized victims of domestic abuse. Not allegations, not speculation, not hearsay, recognized victims. You might assume that once someone is acknowledged as a victim, the system would support them. You'd like to think that the response would be protection, support, understanding. But when the victim is a man, something strange happens. Instead of support, there's suspicion. Instead of protection, there's hesitation. It's like people don't quite know where to file the information. The label says victim, but the person standing here is a man, and suddenly the room gets a bit awkward. Like someone just told a joke that nobody was sure if they were allowed to laugh at. I've got one father who has been attacked for years, verbally, emotionally, psychologically, physically, recognized as a victim, yet slowly, still, very quietly, the narrative begins to change. The story shifts because the system has an extraordinary ability to do one thing very well, rewrite the script. Suddenly the conversation isn't about what happened to him. Suddenly the conversation becomes, well, maybe he's part of the problem. Maybe he's the one causing the conflict. Maybe he's the one escalating things. It's remarkable how quickly the victim can become the suspect. You almost expected someone to pop up and say, well, yes, he was attacked, but did he look a bit attackable? And here's the part that really tests my patience. I spent hours talking to these men, hours, days, building their confidence, preparing them for the moment when they have to talk and walk into any meeting, courtroom, whatever it might be, whatever's actually going on there, and whatever's happening. I'm getting them ready for it, because fear does a strange thing to people, does very strange things to people. If you've spent years being worn down emotionally, psychologically, sometimes physically, you don't just walk into a room feeling powerful. You walk in feeling like the floor might disappear underneath you. So I talk to them, I encourage them, I prepare them. And then the moment arrives, the meeting starts, the court hearing starts, the professionals are sitting there looking down their glasses at you, common folk. The questions begin, and the man who has spent hours telling me exactly what's happened suddenly goes silent. And I'm sitting there thinking, what exactly was the point of the last 6 hours on the phone? But I understand it, I get it, because the moment you sit in that chair, something happens. The system has a weight to it, and that weight can silence people. Now, let's talk about something else that happens in family court. Children who suddenly refuse contact with one parent. Now, any parent listening to this knows the difference between a normal teenage behavior and something that isn't normal. Teenagers roll their eyes and hiss and fluff around and whatever, slam doors. They pretend that their parents are embarrassing. Maybe they are. That's normal. But if teenagers actually liked their parents all the time, we'd probably call a psychologist. But sometimes something very different happens. A child who's previously had a loving relationship with a parent suddenly refuses to see them at all. No gradual distancing, no awkward teenage phase, just a complete shutdown. They won't get in the car, they won't answer the messages, they don't speak on the phone. There's no safeguarding concerns, there's nothing. And when the parent raises concerns, they're often told something incredibly reassuring. This behavior is normal. What? It's normal. Well, that's comforting, isn't it? In the same way, being told that your house's fire is a normal level of flames, because that'd be comforting, wouldn't it? Because sometimes those feelings don't appear naturally. Sometimes those feelings have been carefully planted. But here's where things get interesting. Psychological assessment? Apparently that's a step too far. Instead, what we get is an independent social worker, which sounds impressive until you realize it depends on one simple thing: both parents actually engaging with the process. And when one parent simply refuses, nothing happens. No meetings, no proper engagement, no cooperation. 5 years. 5 years of refusing to properly engage with professionals. And the consequences? Nothing. No enforcement, no accountability, no pressure to actually participate. Now let me just say something that everyone in the room already knows is true. If it were the father refusing to engage with professionals for 5 years, he would be absolutely destroyed in that system. Labelled obstructive, labelled hostile, labelled uncooperative with the court process, and the consequences would come down hard. But when the rules are applied differently depending on who's sitting in the chair, something dangerous happens. The narrative starts drifting. And once that narrative starts drifting, the truth can disappear entirely. Take another case, for example. A man recognized as the victim of domestic abuse. Years of conflict directed at him. And the conflict didn't even escalate until he did. Something that should have been seen as responsible, he took his child into his care. And when things escalated, that's when things escalated. And now there's a normalization application against him. And just like that, the man who was recognized as the victim is now treated like a criminal. The story has been rewritten, and the question you start asking yourself is a very simple one. How did the victim become the villain? Because that's the quiet trick the system sometimes performs. Not always out of malice, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of outdated assumptions, sometimes because the familiar story is easier to believe than the complicated one. But for the people living through it, it's not a story, it's their life. And when the system starts rewriting the narrative, people inside it are the ones that pay the price. Let me tell you what that actually looks like in real life. Because when people talk about family court, they often talk about documents, hearings, reports, orders, the official words, the sort of words that sound sort of calm and organized, like everything's under control. But behind every one of those words is a human sitting somewhere in their house at night wondering what the hell just happened in their life. Because when people say court order, it sounds tidy, like it's a piece of paper. What they don't mention is the bloke sitting in the kitchen at 2 a.m. staring at a bit of paper thinking, how did my entire life get reduced to 3 paragraphs and a signature? I remember speaking to one father after a hearing, decent man, quiet bloke, not aggressive, not argumentative, just exhausted. The sort of man who apologizes when someone else bumps into him. He walked into the court thinking the truth would speak for itself, which is quite a sweet idea, really. Optimistic, almost adorable. Like turning up into a boxing match believing that the referee is there to give you a hug. He walked out of an order that was meant he could barely see his child. And he sat there afterwards and said something that stuck with me. He said, I thought if I just told the truth, they'd see it. And that's what so many people believe. They believe truth is enough. But family court isn't always about truth. It's about narratives. And whoever controls the narrative often controls the outcome, which is slightly worrying when you realise that in family court, sometimes the best storyteller wins. Another father I worked with spent years being attacked verbally and psychologically by his partner. Years. No arguments, not normal relationship conflict. Years of being worn down. Eventually, the situation escalated so badly that the children ended up in his care. Now, logically, you'd think that that would be seen as a positive step. A father stepping up, providing stability, protecting his kids. But the moment that happened, something strange occurred. The conflict suddenly intensified. Accusations appeared. Applications appeared. Legal documents started multiplying like rabbits. And before long, the man who'd spent years being on the receiving end of abuse was sitting in court defending himself against further allegations. Now imagine what that feels like. Imagine surviving years of abuse only to find yourself sitting in the courtroom being treated like the dangerous one. It's a bit like calling a fire brigade because your house is on fire and then them turning up and arresting you for owning the matches. Because once that narrative changes, reality sometimes becomes optional. And this is where one of the most damaging phases in family court appears. You'll hear it all the time. The children's wishes and feelings. Now, don't misunderstand me. Children's wishes and feelings absolutely matter. Of course they do. Anyone who thinks children's feelings don't matter probably shouldn't be allowed near children or pets or houseplants. But here's the uncomfortable question the system often struggles to ask. Where did those feelings come from? Because children don't just live in a vacuum. They absorb what's around them. They absorb the tone in the house. They absorb conversations they hear. They absorb the tension, the resentment, the subtle comments, the little seeds that get planted day after day. Children are basically emotional sponges, except sponges don't usually get dragged into court proceedings. And sometimes those seeds grow into something powerful. A child who suddenly believes one parent is the enemy, even when that belief was never their own idea in the first place. Now, when that happens, the obvious step would be to a psychological assessment. Someone qualified to step in and actually who understands what's going on in the child's mind. But very often, that step never happens. Instead, we get reports, meetings, conversations, lots of very serious people sitting around tables nodding thoroughly. But the deeper questions never actually get explored. And in the meantime, years pass, 5 years in some cases, 5 years of a parent not properly engaging with professionals, 5 years of avoiding the process, 5 years of delaying, resisting, refusing, which is in most parts of life would come with consequences. Try ignoring your tax bill for 5 years and see how patient the system suddenly becomes. And yet, here, the consequences remain almost non-existent. Now, again, let's be honest. If a father behaved that way for 5 years, the system would come down on him like a freight train. The language would be brutal, obstructive, hostile, non-compliant, you name it, uncooperative with the court process. It's all there, which are basically the legal system's polite way of saying, we're getting very annoyed with you. Very, very annoyed. But when accountability disappears on one side of the case, the entire system starts tilting. And when the system tilts, justice slowly slides off the table. Now, the uncomfortable truth is this. Most people in family court system are not bad people. Most professionals are trying to do the right thing. Judges, social workers, lawyers, many of them genuinely care about children. But good intentions don't always produce good outcomes. Because if good intentions alone solved problems, every New Year's resolution would work. And when the system develops blind spots, those blind spots can destroy families. Because what I see going again and again are fathers walking into that system believing one simple thing. If I tell the truth, everything will work out. And what they slowly discover is something much harder to accept. The system isn't always designed to find the truth. Sometimes it's simply designed to manage the conflict, to move cases along, to close files, to reduce the noise. And from an administrative perspective, that probably makes perfect sense. From a human perspective, it can be devastating because the people living inside those cases are still carrying those consequences. The father who hasn't seen his child properly in years, the child who has grown up believing something that was never really actually true. The family's fractured by narratives that were never properly challenged. And here's the part people rarely say out loud. Family court doesn't just decide where children live. It shapes how those children see their parents for the rest of their lives. One decision, one narrative, one set of assumptions, and suddenly the child grows up believing their father didn't fight for them, when in reality, he spent years fighting the system that never quite heard him. So then people ask me what family court is really like. I tell them something very simple. Family court isn't the next balanced process people imagine. It's messy, it's human, it's full of assumptions, blind spots and narratives that can change faster than anyone expects. And if we actually want a system that protects children, then the first thing we need is honesty about how the current one really works. Not the brochure version, not the real version, but the real version. The one families inside are living every single day. If you need help with your family court process, feel free to get in touch. info@familycourtmastery.com or give me a call, 07883 959 195.